Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, this is your captain speaking.
Sink rate. Pull up. Sink rate. Pull up. Pull up.
So उस चक्कर में to smoothen the landing they were floating over the runway and they used another 500 to 800 feet of extra runway.
के दिन अगर हम एयर एशिया से फ्लाइट लेते हैं तो सवाल खड़ा होता है कि क्या हमारी सेफ्टी खतरे में है।
कितने तेजस्वी लोग हैं हमारे पास, कितने शानदार विचार रखते हैं जी, और कुछ लोग मनोरंजन भी करवाते हैं।
Let's go, fellas. Hey guys, hope everyone is doing great. My name is Jatin. I'm a student pilot. Yes, these memes become a part of your life. And in today's podcast, we will discern the causes of the Air India Flight 812 crash that occurred in Mangalore 10 years ago. At the end of the podcast, we will be able to understand whether this accident was really avoidable. That is why I have divided this podcast into two parts, mainly because it could have gotten a bit too informative or a tad lengthy. Okay? After all, the whole motive is to demystify aviation and help clear the air surrounding aviation news, issues, etc. etc. We have an A320 pilot joining us in the second part of this podcast who will chime in with his knowledge and share his opinion about safety in aviation. It will be a lot more interactive, so stay tuned, guys. Well, recently, a renowned YouTuber slash captain has spoken about the causes of the Mangalore crash in order to bolster his case for safety in aviation. Fair play to him. For the uninitiated, in case you have not seen the original interview, here's the clip.
अब ये फ़्लाइट सेफ्टी को कैसे इफ़ेक्ट करता है मैं आपको बताता हूँ। 2010 में जो एयर इंडिया का मैंगलोर क्रैश हुआ था उसमें जो रिपोर्ट आई थी, इन्वेस्टिगेशन आई थी, उसमें ये रिकमेंडेशन था कि ये एक कंट्रीब्यूटिंग फैक्टर हो सकता है कि जो उनके पायलट्स थे उनको बार बार काउंसलिंग दी गई थी हार्ड लैंडिंग के लिए। बोइंग कहता है कि जब आप लैंड करते हैं तो 2.1 जी से कम का अगर इम्पैक्ट है तो आपको काउंसलिंग की ज़रूरत नहीं है, बट वहाँ पे जो कैप्टन थे उनको 1.9 जी की भी लैंडिंग करने पे उनको काउंसलिंग दी गई थी। सो उनके दिमाग में बैठ गया था कि हाँ यार ज़्यादा हार्ड करेंगे तो काउंसलिंग के लिए बुला लिया जाएगा। सो उस चक्कर में टू स्मूदन द लैंडिंग दे वर फ्लोटिंग ओवर द रनवे एंड दे यूज्ड अनदर 500 to 800 फीट ऑफ एक्स्ट्रा रनवे। दे वर अ लॉट ऑफ प्रॉब्लम्स, तो अप्रोच थी उसमें भी बहुत चीज़ें थी, बट ये स्पेसिफिक प्रॉब्लम्स में दे एट अप अनदर वेरी यूजफुल पोर्शन ऑफ द रनवे विच वाज अबाउट 500 to 800 फीट। सो ये बैक ऑफ द माइंड में जो जाती है ना चीज़ें, ये एक दिन जब सारी चीज़ें ख़राब जा रही होंगी ना, एवरीथिंग विल अलाइन एंड देन दैट लीड्स टू एन एक्सीडेंट।
Okay, guys, that was the clip right there. Just to let you know, whatever the captain has said about how an accident happens is spot on. This is exactly what the Swiss cheese theory model suggests. This is how it looks. These were the primary causes. We will examine each cause in detail when I'll play the recreation of the accident shortly. These primary causes, when aligned together, will eventually lead to an accident, and this is exactly what happened in Mangalore. Ideally, I did not want the video to be longer than 15 minutes, but then I also wanted to cover every little detail possible in this podcast. So please bear with me, guys. I know it's a little lengthy, but trust me, it's worth your time. And watch it in parts if you may. On that note, let's get started with the recreation of the accident. Captain Klusiker was a Serbian national, and since Air India Express had a dearth of captains in their fleet, they hired a lot of foreign pilots. He used to fly for 2 months and take a leave for 2 weeks right after. He would go back to his home country, that is Serbia, during this time. The accident took place on the 22nd of May 2010. He had returned from Serbia on the 19th of that month. He was well rested, and the captain was requested if he could operate that flight, and he agreed. There was sufficient time given to let his body adjust to any circadian disharmony, if any. Considering Serbia is 3.5 hours behind India, the difference is not much, but still, there was sufficient time given to the captain to adjust for any quote unquote body clock changes as he had returned to India. And as pilots, it's imperative to maintain sleep hygiene at all times, no matter how challenging it is, especially during window of circadian low. What is window of circadian low? WOCL is the time period between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. When your body is at its weakest. If you wish, you can pause and see all the details about the captain, including the rest period. Despite being well rested, oddly enough, the captain was asleep for more than the controlled rest period time of 45 minutes. On long haul flights, say for example from Delhi to San Fran, there would be 6 pilots, 3 pairs of captains and first officers. But on short haul flights, it's only 2. So, it's important to adhere to the controlled rest period time, because if you're in prolonged state of sleep, you lose situational awareness, and it can even influence the pilot who is awake to feel drowsy. That's natural, right? So was pilot fatigue a contributing factor? You have to take this with a pinch of salt. Not really. The captain was well rested, as was the first officer, as we have seen earlier. Pilot fatigue is usually observed amongst cargo pilots. Captain Sully had pushed for a reform about flight schedule of cargo pilots. DGCA takes note of any airlines that exceed flight duty time limitation. As you can see in this article, it's called FDTL, flight duty time limitation. Again, this does not necessarily mean that commercial pilots are not fatigued. In some instances they are, and there are ways and means to tackle fatigue in aviation. This is how the FTTL typically should be. You can pause again if you wish. Also, as the popular saying goes, correlation does not imply causation. The main cause was the chain of errors triggered, as we have seen in the Swiss cheese theory model earlier, and this will get clearer as we progress along the recreation of this accident. Both pilots are supposed to stay awake at least 30 minutes prior to commencing descent. This gives them enough time to prepare for descent and comply with checklists before commencing descent. Planning descent can sometimes get a tad tricky. That is why it is important for both pilots to remain fresh and alert at this phase. In this case, the captain was probably in sleep inertia, which made him make extremely poor judgment during critical phase of the flight. To make sure that both pilots are fresh and awake, the cabin crew is required to check in with pilots on the intercom every 30 minutes. Also, this rule is applicable worldwide and not just in India. Therefore, following the SOP or the standard operating procedure is vital. As far as experience goes, the captain was quite experienced. He had more than 10,000 hours, and he had landed in Mangalore 16 times as the pilot in command, and the first officer had operated 66 flights as the pilot monitoring. As per the SOP of Air India Express, only captains were required to conduct takeoff and landings at this airport. This is among the 11 critical airfields in India. So, the captain wakes up from his slumber and there is no descent planning whatsoever. This is mandatory, but again, the flight crew did not plan this at all. The aircraft is only 25 miles away from the airport currently. This right here is the approach plate of Mangalore Airport. Again, you can pause and check the altitude at the respective distance from the airport. Also, pilots actively use the height and distance measurement formula just to double check whether they are at the correct altitude or not. They should have been established at the ILS approximately 6 nautical miles away from the airport as per the approach plate. The tower instructs the pilots to report in when they were locked onto the ILS for runway 24. The captain then lowers the landing gear at approximately 8,500 feet, which was quite bizarre. He also extends the speed brakes to help the plane descend faster. For those who are wondering why the captain did this, he did this to produce more drag, and more drag will cause loss of lift faster. This in turn will make the plane descend faster. Was this in line with the SOP of Air India Express? Not at all. This is highly unusual. As you already know, Mangalore is one of the top 11 critical airfields in India, and you have to land at the recommended speed because the runway is a tabletop runway, and it was only 2.4 kilometers long back then. These procedures exist because of the geographical conditions. You cannot fight physics and geography. The captain selects 40-degree flaps. In Boeing, it's flaps 0, 1, 2, 5, 10, 15, 25, 30, 40. And in Airbus, it's flaps 1, 2, 3, and full. Same stuff, different methods and terminologies. Because of the high altitude, the plane locked onto the glide path for the runway. But it captured the route to come in from a much steeper angle. Therefore, a false glide slope was captured. I've drawn a diagram to explain this to you guys in the simplest way possible. Rapid descent is always avoided unless there is a serious emergency and an intentional nosedive is carried out in that case. This is the approach plate for Mangalore. So the aircraft should have been at 2900 feet at 10 miles away from the airport. However, the aircraft was at 2500 feet when it was, wait for it, 2 miles away from the airport. Since the plane was descending way too fast, it must have been at 2900 feet, probably at around 2.2 or max 2.5 miles away from the airport, and it should have been at 10 miles away from the airport. So there is a huge discrepancy here. Do you see the glaring mistake? That's like touching distance view from the flight deck. Naturally, the captain tried to descend steeply in order to land on the runway. This increased the speed of the aircraft considerably. About false glide slope, the usual nose down is 3 degrees, but even if you descend faster, you will still capture the glide slope and land on the runway, but you're coming in way too steep because you're locked onto the glide slope from a much steeper angle. This is really bad for the passengers as well because they will feel uneasy on the approach. It is something like this. If you're coming in properly at the right altitude and speed, everything is spick and span. But if you come in too high and too fast, the plane will capture a false glide slope and this will increase the speed of the aircraft inadvertently. Please keep this in mind as it will help us understand whether the crew really tried to float the aircraft or was it because of the high speed gain in the process that they were unable to stop in time. This is the final chain of event that triggers the accident. The captain increases the rate of descent manually to 4,000 feet per minute when it is not even legal in civil aviation unless there is a grave emergency. But there was enough fuel and the weather conditions were calm even for a go around. You see how steep the nose of the aircraft is at this point. It's way beyond the 3-degree nose down approach. The first officer by now has understood that they are in trouble if they do not abort the landing and come in again. He gives 3 calls in total. So there are 2 queues. The first officer alerting the captain not once but 3 times, and even the EGPWS system blaring the warning to alert the flight crew about the rapid descent rate. The EGPWS alerts you when the plane is approaching an obstacle or if the plane is descending too fast, hence the term sink rate. Also, if you have taken a look at the approach plate, the pilots were supposed to notify the approach tower at 6 nautical miles because that's where they were supposed to lock on to the glide slope. But as per the report, the first officer was forcibly asked to acknowledge that they are established. And in reality, they were not. But the first officer was not keen on continuing with the approach in the first place. A little off track, but the first officer always used to play by the book and he had filed a written complaint against a different foreign captain who did not follow the correct crew resource management procedures and the SOP of the company in one of the flights. As a result, both the foreign captain and the first officer were due to receive counseling. Maybe this prompted First Officer Harbinder Ahluwalia to not take over the controls. He could have taken over controls, but it would not be right on my part to say why he chose not to take over the controls because I was not present in the cockpit that time. Maybe it's an Asian cultural thing that we keep quiet when superiors tend to brandish their superiority or when they are in the wrong. This is evident in crashes that have occurred in India, Pakistan, Japan, Korea, and Bangladesh because some employees believed in hierarchy. But this scenario has been changing drastically, much to our relief, since quite some time. Let's snap back to the Mangalore crash. The main reason the accident occurred was because the aircraft was on a false glide slope and the captain persisted with the landing. Now, there are ways to identify false glide slope. Pilots actively double check using the height and distance relationship to ensure they are at the right altitude. We just saw that earlier. This eliminates the possibility of a false glide slope. It's a tad tricky to identify hard landings as well. According to Boeing survey, many a time, pilots felt that the landing was hard at 5 to 7 feet per second because the sensors can deceive us. That's why pilots are trained to always rely on their instruments during critical phases of flight. The limit for hard landing is 10 feet per second and beyond as per Boeing. This is among the three main factors that determine a hard landing. I'll not get into the details of that though right now because it's not important for this particular incident. This landing could have been at around 66 feet per second approximately. You divide 4000 feet by 60 seconds to get your answer because that was the descent rate set by the captain. The speed was higher by 20 knots. The aircraft should have been 50 feet above the threshold marker, but instead it was 200 feet above at that point of time. 1 knot is approximately 1.8 kilometers per hour. As a result, the plane kept floating to bleed speed and drop altitude. The crew only had 800 meters to stop the aircraft. Because the 737 was way faster and higher, it landed 1.6 kilometers away from the threshold marker. This 737 was equipped with a short field performance package that helps the plane stop faster as well.
काउंसलिंग दी गई थी, सो उनके दिमाग में बैठ गया था कि हाँ यार ज़्यादा हार्ड करेंगे तो काउंसलिंग के लिए बुला लिया जाएगा. सो उस चक्कर में टू
लैंडिंग जब वो फ्लोटिंग ओवर द रनवे
अब द माइंड में जो जाती ना चीज़ें, ये एक दिन जब सारी चीज़ें ख़राब जा रही होगी ना, एवरीथिंग विल अलाइन एंड देन दैट लीड्स टू एन एक्सीडेंट.
But the runway length was adequate for this plane to stop comfortably under ideal conditions. The plane also floated because of flap load relief. In simple terms, flap load relief means that the flaps are configured to handle certain speeds. If the VREF or the final approach speed is above 162 knots during landing, it was 164 knots in this case, then if the flaps are at flaps 40, same as the Mangalore case, they would get reef configured to flaps 30. If the VREF speed becomes 158 knots, obviously if the plane is trying to land, it will drop speed. So it did reach 158 knots whilst floating over the runway. Then the flaps would once again get reset to flaps 40 as per the auto function. This also caused the plane to float longer. The report clearly states that this was not a contributing factor. This report was published on 31st October 2010, 5 months after the crash. 160 plus families were affected by this accident. They had received their closure and they are trying to heal. It's been over 10 years since the accident took place. इस रिपोर्ट में कंट्रीब्यूटिंग फैक्टर है ही नहीं काउंसलिंग. आप इतने कैजुअली कैसे बोलती है फिर उस इंटरव्यू में? I'm with you when it comes to safety and I empathize with you in your endeavor to endorse the highest forms of safety in civil aviation. But I've laid out the statistics of flight safety in India for all the viewers later on. The record is 2 fatal crashes in over 400 million flights in the past 20 years in India. That speaks a lot. Period. Pilots can also check the landing impact on the FMS MCTO after every landing. The friendly counsel was given to just the captain in an isolated incident in Thiruvananthapuram. This first officer was not involved either. A different first officer had executed the landing, but it is still the captain's responsibility to check for high energy and fast approaches. The captain is the pilot in command for a reason. This simply does not add up, and the priority of any pilot is to land within the touchdown zone, especially on monsoon and summer days. Buttering the landing is an added bonus if the conditions are conducive. As per Boeing, it is the airline's discretion to conduct inspection of the plane or even offer counsel to the pilots to understand what led to the hard landing incident. This is only to prevent any potential incident from developing into a disaster. And that Boeing can be consulted for assistance if need be. Don't you think that's the right thing to do? As per the AMM or the Aircraft Maintenance Manual, the max impact during landing should not exceed 2.1 G for the 737. For the Airbus A320, it's higher, it is 2.6 G. Both are in the same category, narrow body type of planes. But if it is 1.8 and beyond, the hard landing incident has to be reported by the pilots. And it requires basic inspection by the engineers at 1.8. 2.1 and above requires maintenance checks and a thorough inspection. There are 2 phases of inspection that have to be carried out, if I'm not mistaken. In this incident, the hard landing was at 1.9. It was a bit close to the max limit of 2.1 G specified by Boeing. And it was a friendly counsel by the chief safety pilot of Air India Express. अगर काउंसलिंग नहीं दी जाएगी तो लोग कहेंगे पहले हार्ड लैंडिंग इंसिडेंट इग्नोर कर दी और शायद इसी कारण ये हादसा हो गया. So the viewpoint you check the issue from matters a lot. Also, pilots simulate for all sorts of failure in the simulator every 6 months for the sim check. Will you simply state that a particular failure incident was playing in the back of the head of the pilot whilst landing the aircraft? No, I don't think so. Redundancies make aviation the safest mode of transportation. I'll share some stats on the number of flights that happen daily worldwide and the year when we had 0 fatalities in jet passenger crashes. Stay tuned. If you consider pure stats, thousands die daily in road accidents. Does the media cover this? No. If an incident in aviation occurs, suddenly we find armchair experts mushrooming everywhere just because they have taken thousands of flights, apparently. This is the internet era that we live in. It comes with its pros and its cons. 20 arrivals and departures happen out of Mangalore daily as of today. So far, we have had this fatal accident which was avoidable and a minor runway veering off incident in which nobody was injured as such. Pilots at Air India Express are required to file for OIR, Operational Incident Report. In case of a missed approach, go around, aborted landing, they all mean the same. These reports should not be punitive in nature, but we see go arounds happen all the time. Take this clip for example.
500. 100 above. Minimum. One hundred. 50. 30. 20. Retard. Retard. Retard.
While we are at it, I would like to give a shout out to Captain Dennis Oaken, whose video you have just seen. Thank you for sending the Boeing service letter. This was not readily available online either. Do check out his channel as he puts up really engaging aviation clips from time to time. The link is in the description below. There are dangerous airports all across the world, but how many accidents really happen? Stat alert, there are 176,000 flights on average daily, sometimes higher as per 2019. In March 2020, the average dropped to only 145,000. That's a lot. Aviation is relatively the safest mode of transport, but terribly unforgiving in case of any errors. Every country's regulatory body has to report into ICAO. If you're curious, you can read the ICAO Safety Report 2019 edition in detail. The link is in the description. You face any queries today? What is the knee-jerk reaction that most of us, including me, do? Face. We Google it, right? Medical issues? No problem. Web empty hai na? Only to scare you to death. Google has become a verb in the modern dictionary. However, what some of us fail to consider that Google cannot always give you objective answers, and that is where it becomes like a ticking bomb. The half information that you have gathered just becomes so explosive that it spreads, and then it becomes very difficult for us to explain how things really work in reality. By the way, this is not restricted solely to aviation.
Oh shit, here we go again.
I thought the cause of this accident was clear as daylight, but of late, I can see a lot of toxicity building up on the internet, especially on YouTube and Twitter. Therefore, I thought I would make this podcast to address the issue in detail because Captain Tapesh had already made a solid and crisp video about this accident. Also, how seriously are we supposed to take media reports when they make glaring mistakes such as these? Movie makers often would show a narrow body plane during a boarding scene and a wide body plane scene during takeoff. Aviation and media reporting do not mix well together, do they? Well, there are few who get the facts right and report about aviation news responsibly, but it is often completely misquoted to grab eyeballs. And then there are some attention seeking armchair experts, people who call themselves engineers and make such clickbait videos. They even went on to change the title because it received a lot of flack. He was seeking for some sort of validation from the captain and his wife. What you see in the video is drag, but as you can see, it was clearly being blown out of proportion, and this could scare a lot of flyers, including the frequent flyers. Because if 500,000 people are viewing your video and the information is creating mass paranoia or hysteria, not everyone will factually check whatever content they are consuming on YouTube. Okay, more than half the people will take it as the holy grail, and this is a worrying trend. And this cuts across all sectors, not just aviation. Similarly, there are memes being made when speed tapes were used on aircraft, which by the way costs thousands of dollars. They're super durable and can withstand a large range of temperatures, because when you're up, no matter what the surface temperature is, it is at least minus 60 degrees or lower at cruise level. The plane will not take off if critical equipment is missing, as the flight crew has to adhere to the minimum equipment list. Okay, I won't digress. My whole point is to reassure you and request you to not give into such half-baked information online. Do your research and talk to someone from the aviation fraternity that can give you precise knowledge. Also, feel free to drop me a message in case you are a nervous flyer and you want a specific concern to be addressed. I'll do whatever I can in my capacity to make you feel better about flying. Also, do check out Aviation Herald in case you're interested in knowing more about incidents across the world. Okay, without further ado, let's play the video.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the main event of the evening.
Yeah, this is big brain time.
So अगर आप ये वाली इमेज देखें, इसमें इमेज में अभी आपको ज़्यादा क्लैरिटी दिखेगी नहीं, तो मैं इस इमेज को थोड़ा सा एनलार्ज करता हूँ. अभी भी नहीं. Let's actually see the landing video. No. फ्लाइट बहुत मस्त थी, बहुत कंफर्टेबल थी. इंडिगो ने अच्छे से सोशल डिस्टेंसिंग मेंटेन की. आई हैव नो क्वाल्म्स अबाउट एनीथिंग. लेकिन हमको पता है कि हादसा कहीं भी कैसे भी हो सकता है. रिसेंटली हमने कराची वाली जो एयरलाइंस दुर्घटना हुई, वो भी हमने विटनेस की.
कराची की दुर्घटना का मुख्य कारण कुछ और था. Let us wait for the official reports to be out.
So it's better to be technically safe than sorry. तो फ्लाइट जब टेक ऑफ की, मस्त हवा में अपन मस्त, क्या बादल, ओ माय गॉड. फिर अराउंड 1.5 घंटे बाद फ्लाइट डिसेंड करना शुरू करती है. आज मेरे पास में टेक्निकल नॉलेज होती है समझने के लिए कि एक्चुअली वो क्यों हो रहा है. लैंडिंग करते समय ना उसकी फ्लैप खुलती है. When the flap opens up, it's supposed to be not broken. फ्लैप का आई थिंक कोई भी पार्ट टूटा हुआ होना नहीं चाहिए. तो ज्यादा से ज्यादा ऐसे करके मूव करेंगे टर्बुलेंस की वजह से. लेकिन अगर एक फ्लाइट का ऐसे मूव करके आ रहा है और एक छोटा सा पार्ट हो जिसका मूवमेंट जो है वो कोऑर्डिनेट है ही नहीं इस टर्बुलेंस के साथ.
何?お前はもう死んでいる。
मैं ईमानदारी से बता रहा हूँ, जब लैंडिंग हुई मेरी कसके फटी. मुझको लैंड करना. थोड़ा सा इंजीनियरिंग माइंड भी है, तो ये सब चीजें देखना बहुत पसंद आता है कि इसमें क्या अंदर कैसे काम कर रही है, क्यों कर रही है, क्या कर रही है. टाइम लेके बात कर सकूं कि ये सिचुएशन है. सो आई टुक माय फोन टू वन ऑफ द एयर होस्टेस, वो इमेज खुली हुई उसके साथ, एंड आई एक्सप्लेन टू हर कि मैम ये हुआ था जब लैंड हो रही थी, जब फ्लैप खुली थी. सो बीच में एक पार्ट है जो अलग ही डायरेक्शन में बहुत वायलेंटली वो मूव किए जा रहा था. प्लीज ये टेक्निकल टीम को दिखा लो. दिस कैन बी अ रियल सेफ्टी कंसर्न. शी लुक्ड एट द इमेज विद अ विजुअल थॉट कि यार ये तो चलता रहता है वाली जो फीलिंग जो हुई ना, वो साफ वो एनर्जी आई मुझे. बट शी वॉज नॉट द मेन एयर होस्टेस. मैं जिनको दिखा रहा था तो मैंने उनसे कहा कि कैन आई शो this image to her also. शायद मेरी वीडियो फुटेजेस में उनका नाम है, पर उनका नाम लेना चाहता हूँ जस्ट फॉर द लाइक रहने दो यार, क्या फायदा. वाज एन एक्सप्रेशन ऑफ शॉक कि ये क्या है, ये कैसे और ये इमेज कैसे रिकॉर्ड की।
मैं सब कुछ जानता नहीं हूँ, सब कुछ समझता नहीं हूँ, इसको समझने में देर लगेगी, लेकिन इसमें कोई बादाम काम नहीं आएगी।
सो उन्होंने भी वही एटीट्यूड दिया कि हाँ सब चलता है, हम देख लेंगे, आप चाहिए कोई बात नहीं,
निकल पहली फुर्सत में निकल।
एंड कुछ दिनों बाद हियर आई एम ऑन यूट्यूब शेयरिंग द स्टोरी विद।
थोड़ा सा डर लगता है।
मैं बहुत अच्छी तरीके से कपड़े धोता हूँ, इसको बिल्कुल नहीं आता, मैं इसको बिल्कुल सिखा दूँ।
करती हैं। आज के दिन अगर हम एयर एशिया से फ्लाइट लेते हैं तो सवाल खड़ा होता है कि क्या हमारी सेफ्टी खतरे में है। आइए डिटेल में जानते हैं इन इश्यूज को। कभी आपने एरोप्लेन की खिड़की से बाहर देखा हो तो जो विंग के नीचे वाला पार्ट होता है, आपने देखा होगा वो टिल्ट हो रहा होता है। इस पार्ट को कहते हैं फ्लैप। ये फ्लैप कितने खुले हैं और कितने बंद हैं, इसको लेकर आप लैंडिंग के कई एस्पेक्ट्स को कंट्रोल कर सकते हो। अगर फ्लैप्स पूरे खुले हैं यानी ऐसे हैं तो इसे फुल फ्लैप पोजीशन कहते हैं। पूरे नहीं खुले हैं, यहाँ पर बीच में एक पोजीशन होती है फ्लैप 3 की पोजीशन। दो मेन एस्पेक्ट्स को आप कंट्रोल कर सकते हो लैंडिंग के फ्लैप्स को यूज करके।
कितने तेजस्वी लोग हैं हमारे पास, कितने शानदार विचार रखते हैं जी, और कुछ लोग मनोरंजन भी करवाते हैं।
आप लोग सब कुछ जानते हो और आप लोग कभी जिंदगी में गलती नहीं करते हो। मैं जानता हूं कि आप लोग भी डरते हो, मगर आपको थोड़ा बोलना चाहिए उनके सामने,
प्लीज।
So that's it, guys. Hope you did not take the memes too seriously. The idea was to end this podcast on a lighter note, as life is serious almost always. In the next podcast, there will be a guest, an A320 pilot, and we will talk about how safe air travel really is, or has it suddenly become unsafe. We will also look at flapless landings and share some interesting aviation trivia and talk about an incident. I would like to end this podcast by offering my sincerest and deepest condolences to the families of Captain Deepak Sathe, First Officer Kilesh Kumar, and all the 16 passengers who passed away unfortunately. Thank you for your supreme sacrifice, sir. I know you did your best and saved the lives of many other passengers in the process. I wish speedy recovery to all the injured passengers of the ill-fated flight. I don't know what else to say. Sometimes words are not enough. And pilots are not investigators. Please do not act like one, especially since we don't have all the facts and figures from the FTR and the CVR. You know it better, right? There will be a short preview in the end. Do stick around if you want to check that out. Until we meet next time. So long, guys. I'll see you in the next one.
Can take some fuel to fly around. Yeah. Technically, we have no handicap items, so we can go. And I can land the aircraft.
I'm watching this match between you and Matthias during the flight. Program was called Redstone.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Do you think the director is a pilot and he saw Dreadstone in Tokyo and he named the project after the approach?
Good theory. You see, after a long night, pilots are talking nonsense.
200, 150, 40, 30, 20, 10, 5.